In this video, we'll learn all about storyboards, what they are, why you should use them, and how to make one. So, what is a storyboard? Quite simply, it's a series of images that represent events over time. We can use a storyboard as a visual outline for planning time-based events, and storyboards are almost always used to develop things like films, animations, games, and performances. And we can see here a few frames from the storyboard for the film Gladiator. So we know a little bit about what a storyboard is. Let's talk about why we would use a storyboard in planning a piece of time-based media. First and foremost, a storyboard helps to visualize your ideas. You're literally getting things down on paper or out onto a screen so that you can see them and think them through. Storyboarding helps you to map the key moments or transitions or sequences in a film, animation, game, or performance. They help us keep track of what is shown and when within the overall sequence, what visuals are inside or outside the frame, and we can see that here in the example storyboard from Kit Laybourne's animation book. And so here we're depicting something floating from one side of the screen to the other and moving in and outside of this rectangular frame. Storyboarding also helps us to plan for what happens in between shots. So how do we transition from one point of view to another? Maybe most importantly, storyboards help us decide where to work hard. So they give us a rough draft of a sequence, and they can help us to decide what visuals are absolutely necessary and which ones maybe would just be nice to have. They give us a chance to think through which animation techniques will be used for a given part of a sequence, and a chance to think about whether the way we execute our visual sequence might be made simpler or easier. To get started storyboarding, you'll need to make sure you know the aspect ratio that you'll be making your film or animation or video in. And that's simply the proportion of width to height in the screen. Once you know this, you can draw out a frame if you're drawing by hand, or use a template file if you're working digitally. Within each frame, you'll sketch each of the key events that you'd like to see in the sequence. Usually this happens one per frame. Remember that sometimes images need to extend outside the frame. So for example, if you're going to do sort of a panning camera motion, you'll have one part of the image that's coming into the frame as another part is leaving the frame. So make sure that you leave yourself some extra room around the outside of the frame just in case you need to do this. The images for each frame might include motion or suggested motion for objects in the scene or the overall camera. And we can see that here in the example on the right, where we have this flying carpet moving from side to side, going in and out of the frame. Once you've sketched out all the key events in your sequence, you can look at them all at once and make decisions about what should come first and what should come in the middle and what should come at the end of the sequence. And it's taking advantage of this stage that can give us really interesting narrative structures, things like flashbacks or situations where maybe the audience knows something that the characters don't. And at any stage in the process, you can add written notes that can give extra info on details like transitions between shots, sounds that might happen along with a scene, or specific motions within a given scene. And we can see that here in this example from the storyboard for the movie Jaws, where the character is about to shove an oxygen tank into the shark's mouth. Now that we know a good overview of the storyboarding process, let's talk about aspect ratio. So again, aspect ratio is the proportion of image width to image height in a film, video, animation, or photograph. Aspect ratio is independent of image size. So we can see in the example on the right here, we have screens of 3 different sizes: a smartphone, a flat screen TV, and a large movie theater. All of these have the same aspect ratio because the proportion of width to height is the same in each example. Aspect ratios are usually represented by a fraction, and it'll usually be formatted in a width to height, either with a colon or a slash in between. So all of these screens are in the 16:9 aspect ratio, even though they're different sizes. Let's take that example a little bit further and talk through how we figure out that aspect ratio. So let's say that we have a video clip that is sized at 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. Now that is the pixel dimensions. That's not exactly the aspect ratio. So to calculate the aspect ratio, we would take that width and divide it by the height. That would give us a fraction that reduces to 16 over 9. So that's what gives us the first two measurements, 16 to 9 or 16 over 9. We'll also sometimes see this fraction further reduced so that the height is 1 and the width is the factor that we would multiply the height by to get the width. But all three of these are referring to the same aspect ratio. Okay, that's a brief overview of what storyboards are, why you should use them, and how to make them.